this 66
Recording
Commission
in progress.
On the 66 Commission on the Status of Women, the CSW, which is the largest and one of the most dynamic intergovernmental gatherings on women's rights on the international scene. It has kicked off on Monday with the opening and marks the start of 2 weeks filled with discussion on this year's priority theme, which revolves around achieving gender equality and the empowerment of all women and girls in the context of climate change, environmental and disaster risk reduction policies and program. My name is Laetitia Thyssen, and I'm the FEPS policy analyst for gender equality. And on behalf of all co-organizing partners, including Fondation Jean-Jaurès, UN Women Germany, PES Women, and FEPS, I'm so delighted to moderate this very special event on climate justice as a feminist issue, addressing how we can move towards a progressive, gender-sensitive environmental policy model from the perspective of the European Union. But before immediately giving the floor to our first speaker delivering the welcoming remarks, let me just flag a few relevant housekeeping notes to our audience, joining us either directly from the CSW premises in New York, as is the case for some of us, but also from Europe and anywhere else in the world. So the main language will be English, but you have the possibility to use simultaneous interpretation if you are following us on the Zoom event. There is the option to follow the event in French, English, and Spanish and German. So you just need to click on the bottom right little globe in order to choose the language of your preference. Secondly, we are aware that this live event takes place in a moment that might not be the most work-life balance friendly to some of us in certain time zones of the world, but considering the requirements to adapt to the different parts of the globe, indeed, the event will be recorded for that purpose and available on YouTube. So those wishing to catch up later after dinner or whenever is best for you, you can do so. However, for those of you who are present with us live, and I see that there's quite many of you, just remain precisely where you are, because we want you to interact with us very actively, and that is why we very warmly encourage you to use the chat box or the comment area if you're following us on YouTube or Facebook. So just make sure that you make generous use of your keyboard and share your thoughts, questions, and remarks as the discussion goes on. And last but not least, even if this parallel event will focus more specifically on how the climate crisis is exacerbating gender inequality, we are also, of course, very much touched by the war in Ukraine, which has affected so many women and girls in many different ways. And that is why we want to underline how these crises are very much interlinked and how they affect us all, but also in very different way and in unbalanced way. And so that is why we'd like to take the time to draw your attention to the possibility to make a donation to help UN Women in addressing the needs of women and girls in Ukraine, and who had in many cases had to flee their countries. And so that's why UN Women is working very closely with civil society organizations in Ukraine, in neighboring countries, in order to monitor the situation and to assess how to best meet the growing needs of so many people, of so many women and so many girls. We will provide you with the relevant links available in German, in French, as well as in English, that will enable you, should you wish so, to make a donation. So they will be made available in the chat box. But now, without further ado, the word goes immediately to the president of PES Women, Zita Gurmai, who is going to deliver her welcoming remarks. So thank you very much, Zita, for being with us. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I was so happy that some of you already tweeted, and I just wanted to make sure that that we have a snowball effect, that every of us did the same, and they can listen in the different countries as well. So first of all, hello everyone. I really would like to give a warm welcome to the CSW66 parallel event hosted by FEPS, Jean-Jaurès Foundation, UN Women Germany, and PS Women. I'm president of PS Women and vice president of FEPS, and we have a really long-standing partnership with Jean-Jaurès Foundation, with UN Women Germany. Thanks for Elke Fermer, my great sister, especially for CSW. And of course, on behalf of all of us, welcome to our pretty timing debate, climate justice as a feminist issue. I strongly believe it is. And of course, we speak about towards a progressive, gender-sensitive environment and EU policy model. Of course, we have an amazing lineup of excellent speakers who will give us their insight into this crucial topic, that is the interconnections between the climate challenges and gender equality challenges our world is facing today. This is why we believe it is long time address both of them and do so simultaneously. And of course, climate and gender equality issues are absolutely interlinked. They both stem from the patriarchal system the world is ruled by, they are fueled by capitalism, and they both have a worse effect on less privileged groups all around the world. These are very, very serious issues. They make up some of the most important challenges of our times. This is why we need progressive voices to team up and find common solutions which can create a better future for all of us, which should be feminist future. But of course, the CSW66 is a perfect occasion to combine the topic and find collaborations across the globe. So we also thanks for the organizers for the relentless effort to continue their work in spite of the pandemic and other difficulties the world is facing. I really would like to make a big chapeau for women who has been doing an amazing job during the pandemic. But in the context, we cannot ignore the situation in Ukraine, which does not only affect people and the climate, but also presents further dangers for gender equality. For example, the large numbers of refugees are women who are walking through the border with their children from Ukraine to Hungary, just to give you a concrete example. And of course, as these women are, these refugee women are women, of course, there is trafficking and sexual violence as a weapon of war and brutal attacks on women's hospitals and other atrocities which are also occurring. The reason why I brought, I don't know how much you can see, a lovely flower. This is the symbol of Ukraine. You know, we really try to make pictures all around Hungary, you know, just to show a strong solidarity for our Ukrainian sisters. But this is not the first time, dear sisters, and regrettably will not be the last time women are caught up in man-made disaster. If the world and its leader does not get its act together, we won't be a planet B. There is no planet B. And there won't be prosperous, healthy, and democratic societies to live in. Just to give you an example, there is going to be a shortage of food because 30% of corn is coming from Ukraine and from Russia. So which means that it will have a real problem in some months. So I think we really need to think before we act, let's put it in this way. But of course, having said this, today we really aim to addressing important questions for feminist climate actions, such as why it is so important to connect gender equality and climate action, which areas of the Green Deal require more urgent action, and how can we ensure and measure the impact of gender mainstreaming. Of course, we also want to clarify what role does the EU and its member states play and exchange best practices among many other element as well. So we really would like to thank you from our bottom of the heart for having registered you in such a large number. Thank you very much for the organizer to put so many great brains together for this debate. And of course, we are really looking forward to your contribution as well. So thank you very, very much for joining us. And I wish that you all will enjoy this event. So let's clapping hands for Leticia and for all the friends who did the job. Thank you very much.
Thanks a lot, Zita, for this highly engaging and committed introductory remarks. And I think they could not have been a better transition to actually leave the floor to our honorable keynote speaker, who is making us the immense pleasure and honor of offering us his thoughts on what feminist climate justice should and could look like. So it is really our great pleasure to welcome Parliamentary State Secretary Niels Annen, and who is very kindly making so many efforts to actually being able to be with us. So the floor is yours. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you all very much. I'm greeting you here from the German Bundestag, where unfortunately I will have to go back after addressing you. But it's really a pleasure, and I send greetings from Minister Svenja Schulze, who unfortunately cannot be here today. You all addressed the situation in Ukraine, and the war in Ukraine is calling, I think, into question many things that we had taken for granted. Many of our convictions, many of our political priorities. That is also true for the ministry that I'm representing here for the economic cooperation and development. We too here have to adjust to some of the priorities in development policy. And at the same time, I want to be very clear. This does not apply to our determination to empower women worldwide and strengthen their rights through a feminist development policy. I believe what my colleagues just mentioned with regard to Ukraine, on the contrary, is an argument to continue with that agenda. Such a feminist development policy is particularly needed with regard to the climate-gender nexus. We have known that, I guess, for a long time, that climate change is not gender fair. There is a vast difference between the contribution, I have to say that unfortunately, of men and the contribution of women to the many causes of climate change and to possible answers. Conventional structures, role models, and traditions are still causing women and girls to be disproportionately affected by the impacts of climate change. The numbers have been known for a long time. For instance, 91% of the people killed by the cyclone Gorky in Bangladesh in 1991 were women. Among the victims of the 2004 tsunami in Banda Aceh, the share of women was 71%. And in 1999, the terrible Hurricane Katrina hit African women particularly hard. People who never had a chance to learn how to swim, to climb a tree or to ride a bike, who have no access to information or are not allowed to take their own decisions, are much more likely to die. And, dear colleagues and friends, that is true to this day. In that context, the London School of Economics looked at natural disasters in more than 140 countries. It found that social and economic inequality and high numbers of casualties among women were correlated. This structural, and I want to repeat, that structural gender gap does not only undermine women's rights to live and to decent livelihoods, it also reduces the global scope for finding solutions. So we need to change our perspectives and realize that women and girls are not only victims of climate change, but that they are actually able to bring about important change. As a climate activist, a very well-known one, Sahima Begum from Bangladesh once put it, we are not born to suffer, we are born to fight. So what do we want to fight for? For example, for better for better quality climate-related jobs and the relevant climate jobs. Studies, dear colleagues, have shown that decarbonization may create more than 30 million new green jobs by 2030. Entirely new occupations may emerge. However, occupations in this field have been traditionally dominated by men. In the energy sector, women only account for 32% of all workers on average. So we have to undertake special efforts to motivate and to enable girls and young women to train for jobs in these promising industries, all across the full range of careers, from electricians to power plant managers, because jobs in the energy sector pay well and they offer career advancement opportunities. That is true for developing countries, but also here in Europe. In short, they provide for a stable income and those an important basis for women's empowerment. In a number of countries, for example, of Tajikistan, India, and Pakistan, the share of women in the energy sector keeps rising. This progress, ladies and gentlemen, needs to be expanded. And we know from experience that women delegates are still a minority in another important field that I want to mention, and that is international negotiations. But things are changing. According to UN Women, in January 2020, just over 50% of all ministers responsible for environment, natural resources, and energy worldwide are women. I believe this is an important signal. After all, one thing is clear. The transition to climate neutral, resilient, sustainable development depends on women. Studies have shown for a long time that SDG 5, gender equality, I don't need to translate that here, I guess, is a key factor for the entire global sustainable agenda and for the Paris Agreement. In other words, the world will not be able to master the climate crisis without true gender equality. So we will be working for the achievements of SDG 5. Here too, the international community will need to speed up its efforts and move from understanding to action. Dear friends, that requires equal rights, more resources, especially for women, and it requires better representation at all levels of decision-making. In practical terms, this means, for example, giving more attention to fostering women's land rights when laws are drafted. Only if you own land or are able to lease it on a long-term basis, will you be able to decide how that land is used. And only if you have a land title will you have invest in water-saving irrigation methods and planting windbreaks or in buying drought-resistant seeds. The second key from my point of view is resources. Women's access to climate finance has to be improved. Often procedures are complicated and hardly understandable without advice. Women micro-entrepreneurs have had a hard time accessing such resources. At the relevant funds, staff usually find it unattractive to work with that group, as this takes a lot of effort, but is not expected to generate much of a profit. No management will decide to devote 10 hours of staff work to handing out an amount of, let's say, $2,000, which is the amount needed, for example, for starting a small tree nursery. Dear friends, ladies and gentlemen, in order to make such climate funds more gender responsive, we have to work with multilateral organizations and civil society to find new approaches. The third key is representation. Women have to enjoy equal representation in political and economic decision-making, and they have to be represented in leadership positions. Here, too, studies have shown that the higher the share of women in parliament, the smaller the carbon footprint of a given country. We need women as champions of the transformation of transport systems for making cities greener and for climate-smart housing construction. And to conclude, I am convinced that climate action and the effort for more gender equality belong together. Let us address both issues together. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you so much. I think here we can send you a big virtual clap and speaking on behalf of all co-organizing partners. And in ganz herzlichen Dank, we thank you so much, Parliamentary State Secretary, for offering such an inspiring impulse speech and so strongly setting the tone of today's discussion, and particularly for highlighting and stressing the centrality of gender equality and SDG 5 in securing a fair and more sustainable future. I think your message was quite clear. Climate action and the fight for gender equality are just two sides of the same coin. So let them be addressed together. So many thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was really a pleasure addressing you. And I now see on my screen my good old friend Elke. I sent you special greetings. I hope I can use that last minute of my time with your permission. I wish you a good proceedings of the discussion, and again, a warm greetings from Minister Schulze.
Thank you very much, and greetings to Germany.
Thank you.
And this is precisely now the moment that our panel speakers are coming in now, because with them, we will precisely address how the challenges that State Secretary has mentioned in his keynote speech and how can they be achieved in practice and concretely speaking. So in alphabetical order, let me first of all introduce you to our speakers and also remind our audience that we highly encourage you to interact with us by asking questions to our speakers and also challenging them, triggering them on what they are going to say, to share with us today. So we have, first of all, Jill Alwood, who is a professor of gender politics at Nottingham Trent University, but also a visiting professor in the College of Europe. And she has published extensively on gender and EU external action, and in particular with a focus on development, migration, and climate change. Our second speaker is Delara Burkhardt. Delara is a member of the European Parliament, part of the S&D group, representing the German delegation, and a member of the Committee on Environment, particularly focusing on circular economy and biodiversity protection. But she was also one of the youngest MEP in German history, so that's also something to be very much proud of. Our third speaker is also a member of the parliament in the S&D group, but representing the Italian delegation. And I'm here pleased to introduce you to Alessandra Moretti. She's a member of the Committee on Environment as well, and she has been at the front row in fighting for issues ranging from health to asylum seekers' rights, and the fight for gender mainstreaming of climate change and environment policy. Then we are also quite lucky to count on a very staunch climate activist voice, showing that women are leading the way when it comes to the fight for climate protection, and that is Adenike Oladosu. Adenike is an ecofeminist, an eco-reporter, and climate justice leader. And she's the founder of I Lead Climate Action, which is an initiative and a Pan-African movement. And she specializes on peace, security, and equality in Africa, especially in the Lake Chad region. And she advocates for the restoration of Lake Chad, and now it can be used to strengthen the livelihood of people in the region. And last but not least, I'm also delighted to introduce you to Kata Tutun, who since 2019 has been the deputy mayor of Budapest, but is also the vice president of the PES committee of the PES group in the Committee of the Region, and responsible for the Green Deal and gender equality. And she's also a member of the PES Women Executive. And on top of this, she's an economist. So I would like to thank all of you in advance for being with us here today. And we look forward to hear from each of you how in your singular and particular ways you have been contributing to shaping a feminist just transition. We know that the unprecedented emergencies of climate crisis, pollution, desertification, and biodiversity loss, coupled with the COVID-19 pandemic, and the many times referred to ongoing and new conflicts, have accelerated and intensified into widespread and interlinked crises that affect us all. But as stressed already several times, they do not affect us equally. Over the past 2 years, gender inequalities and injustice have been highlighted and exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic, with millions of women having been thrown out of work and with a crushing impact on their economic and social rights. And many more have been confronted with an impossible choice between earning an income and doing unpaid but essential care work. Women and girls are also exposed to the greatest threats and the deepest harms. In fact, according to UNDP, when climate disasters strike, they do not, as they do with increasing frequency, research shows that women and girls are up to 14 times more likely than men to die. And as Secretary General Antonio Guterres made very clear in his opening remarks at this CSW66, this demonstrates once more that we live in a male-dominated world with male-dominated culture. And to use again his very own words, we are still living with the results of millennia of patriarchy that excludes women and prevents their voices from being heard. So in other words, the seriously endangered state of peace in our world cannot be seen in disconnection from the long-standing structures of unequal system and inclusion and exclusion, as illustrated by the current and recent developments in the world. So in the face of this context, this opening speech in the CSW on Monday really sent a strong statement by calling for gender equality and women's rights to be at the heart of a renewed social contract that is to be fit for today's society and economy. And that is precisely in the continuity of this call that today's parallel event is taking place. In fact, FEPS, Fondation Jean-Jaurès, Space Women, and UN Women joined forces today in order to explore the ways to bring forward such a new social contract responding to the climate emergency, which is rooted in ecofeminist values. And whilst focusing on the European perspective, we welcome how environmental protection and gender equality are both finally high up on the EU agenda. However, the road is still very long in order to achieve the ambitious targets, effective policy, and political culture that truly recognizes the two issues as mutually dependent and interconnected. So that is one of the many questions that we will be asking ourselves here today with our speakers. And now I'm looking more particularly to start with to Delara Burkhardt, who came today in order to present her report. Indeed, Delara, you wanted to share with us the findings of this report that is called A Feminist European Green Deal. And spoiler alert, it concludes that the EU Green Deal is not in line with the EU gender equality agenda. So Delara, if you agree with that, I will firstly screen the video that you have shared with us and that you wanted to show to our participants in order to illustrate the main points of the report before having you comment on this.
The climate crisis hits us all, but it doesn't hit us equally. Women are affected more often by the impacts of climate change. Gender inequalities may even increase because of the climate crisis if our climate policies don't address this. This problem comes across in the European Green Deal, the EU's climate program. That's why I sat down with scientists and discussed how we can change this. The answer is the feminist European Green Deal. Women are more often responsible for care work and household chores and therefore more often at home. In addition, their average income is lower, the so-called gender pay gap. If energy prices rise, a warm apartment becomes a luxury. Leaky windows, poorly insulated walls, and old heating systems drive up costs even further. If our policies, like subsidy programs, do not take the social issue into account, women continue to be at risk. Right now, a lot of money is being spent on the expansion of renewable energies, the transformation of industry, and sustainable construction. This is important because it is here that a large amount of CO2 is produced and jobs become future-proof. However, these are male-dominated sectors. There's a great opportunity for the European Green Deal to finally give social professions the upgrade they deserve and to break with old clichés. These are just two examples that show why the feminist climate policy is so important. A feminist Green Deal that enables a sustainable future not just for the few, but for the many. That doesn't just paint our economy green, but puts happy people and a healthy planet at its center. You want that too? Then share the video, read our study, and let's make European climate policy feminist.
So that was it for the teaser, and so that's the moment I would like to ask Delara to come and take the floor to actually comment on the thoughts that lie behind all this work, and particularly the report behind this.
Yes, I'm very happy to do so, and thanks for the opportunity also to make it like mixed message media. I'm happy to be here with you and with all the amazing panelists. And yes, basically the video made a summary of why the need of a feminist Green Deal is so important. So we are seeing that the Commission is claiming to be the union of equality, and we have a wonderful gender equality strategy. We have an anti-racism action plan. We have an LGBTQI strategy. But how are those strategies linked to what we are doing on a policy level? For example, when it comes to the big European Green Deal that we are all working on right now, who is working with climate policies. So there is a gender blind spot in the EU's gender equality policies. It's the Green Deal. So we saw that the Green Deal and the gender equality strategy were presented at the same time, but there was not a single time in the Green Deal the word gender being used. So we saw a lack there. But I don't want to undermine this. We know that the European Green Deal has been really a game changer in the EU. It is often reduced to the discussions about climate targets, only minus 55% by 2030, climate neutrality by 2050, the latest, and so on. But we have to see that the Green Deal is way more, and it definitely can be way more, because if it is implemented correctly, it really has the potential to change our society and economy in a very, very profound way. And it is about climate policies. It is about biodiversity protection. It has agricultural elements, mobility, food system, etc. And we know that all those tasks we are challenging now, they will affect everyone, but we also have to see that they don't impact everyone equally. Women are and will be and already are facing increased vulnerabilities due to their different social roles, status, resources, and power. And the current rising energy prices really much also reflect that. We are always talking about how we can, as I see Elke, we have a very emotional debate on the fuel prices right now. And we know that 62% of the cars in Germany are owned by men. So just reducing or cutting the fuel prices won't be looking at the people who will suffer the most by rising energy prices. So as a S&D member of the European Parliament, I ask myself, how could we seize this opportunity to tackle both the climate crisis and the inequality crisis that we are still facing in Europe, particularly when it comes to gender inequalities? I wanted to find out how the European Green Deal can be implemented in a gender-just manner. And I am happy, and you said it's my study, it's not, it's a teamwork that with the Friedrich Ebert Foundation, with Women Engaged for a Common Future and the European Environmental Bureau, I really found amazing partners to draft this study, to look deeper into this issue and to propose concrete solutions that we as policymakers then can use to end the European Green Deal's gender blindness. So the report really nicely makes clear that climate change doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in the context of social inequalities. This makes climate change not only an environmental problem, it's also a social justice problem, because climate change and our response to tackle it affects everyone. So the problem is the European Green Deal does not recognize that yet. It is perceived as the EU's new growth strategy and therefore does not depart from the traditional approach of economy that really focuses on the profit first. So what I think is needed also is the rethinking with the Green Deal of our economic model. We need a feminist well-being economy that is centered on care for human beings and nature. And this should be the core of the Green Deal, which is the reason why I think we have to also widen our understanding of the word just transition. This is the main part we talk about when we talk about the social aspects of the Green Deal. And I think we already have come a big way, and it's now very much on vogue to talk about the just transition. But we also have to make the context wider what we understand under the just transition, because right now we are really much focusing on, for example, seeking to open up pathways into a clean energy future for mostly male workers in old fossil fuel-based industries and coal-dependent regions. This is not the transition we are meaning. And we need to think it more broadly, because we need to put vulnerabilities in the center, as I said. And yes, working in a carbon-intense industry is a vulnerability in the ecological transition, but there are other ones, and we have to tackle them. And we need to identify those gendered vulnerabilities, make them visible, and of course then tackle them. So the study I commissioned is a very small piece in this puzzle, where we looked in the three biggest climate, the three biggest emitters, let me put it like this, and the energy sector, the transport sector, and the agriculture. And just in time for the Fit for 55 negotiations we are now doing in the Parliament, we have also a set of concrete policy proposals who come with that. So I can tell you years about what smart policy proposals we have in this study, but maybe just to sum it up, what we need to do is we need to collect gender disaggregated data, make the gendered impacts visible, which is right now not the case. We need to embed social and gender equality conditionalities in the law, compel authorities to specifically address the specific challenges women and other marginalized groups are facing. We need to make gender budgeting binding. We're talking about billions that are supposed to be mobilized with the Green Deal, and we have to look that they are put up in a gender fair way. And we also have to make sure to ensure gender balance in expert and representative bodies, because also, of course, representation matters. And I have to say that here already also the European Parliament has to work on that, because most Fit for 55 files are negotiated by men. And unfortunately, the only out of 15 Fit for 55 dossiers, 4 are by conservatives women. So our group also needs to work, our political family also needs to work on that. So this is what I wanted to reach with the study, having a concrete proposal on the table, tackling the gender blindness of the Green Deal and making concrete proposals. And I can promise you that I'm already drafting a lot of amendments to the Fit for 55 package to make this also reality, because it's just in time. We are now doing the Fit for 55 package, and we need to act now to avoid the the Green Deal and the ecological transition, to transist the gender inequalities with us in a carbon neutral future. And I don't want that. I want the real change. So this is why we need the feminist Green Deal.
Definitely the right way to go. And thank you very much for highlighting everyone's attention to this important report that you have been doing together with FES and the other partners. So we will make sure also to share this with our participants, because I think you made everyone very curious for more in that. And I hope you can stay on to continue interacting with us, because as you were speaking about gender impact assessment, gender budget, I saw very much Jill nodding a lot, because she, as an academic, she has been precisely researching this aspect and how gender and EU climate policy come together, or how perhaps they are still too gender blind, as you, Delara, has very much highlighted. So I would like to hear from Jill, what is the sort of climate, legal and policy frameworks that we need for a cohesive basis for gender responsive governments?
Thank you. That was an excellent intervention, and I was so pleased to hear you voicing all of these very positive findings of your report and your proposals for change. I'm really looking forward to reading the report and to following up on it with you. I'm very interested in the separation between gender mainstreaming and climate mainstreaming. There's a very strong commitment, at least on paper, to pursuing both of these things as very important endeavours, but they tend to be pursued in parallel, and there's no connection between them. So I would advocate trying to ensure that we work on the synergies between the efforts to integrate gender equality into all policy areas at all stages, from formulation through implementation to impact, with the attempt to do the same thing with climate mainstreaming. Both of those endeavours are very worthy, but we need to connect the two. So it's looking at the synergies between these things to work out a way that we can ensure that climate mainstreaming is gender responsive, that climate mainstreaming is itself gender mainstreamed. And I think we still have a long way to go there. So you have said, Delara, that the European Green Deal is gender blind. That's very disappointing. I know that people, including you and many other people, who are present today, are working very, very hard to do something about that. But it should never have happened. The EU has been committed to gender mainstreaming for so long that you would expect such a major policy endeavour to be gender mainstreamed. So there's an obligation to gender mainstreaming, and it needs to be followed through so that we can see the connections between climate and gender at every level. This goes beyond climate policy to energy policy, transport policy, agriculture policy. So we need to work on the synergies between those and make sure that policy making is genuinely joined up, and that we have full policy coherence. Mainstreaming is very widely talked about. There's a lot of lip service to it. We know that it has become very much a tick box exercise in many areas. But mainstreaming does still have radical potential. At its origins, it was an incredibly radical idea. The idea that gender would not be dealt with separately as a separate issue that was something to do with women and not really of relevance to people who worked on proper policy issues. And to bring gender equality into the centre of all policy debates at all stages could be genuinely transformative. So we can reinvigorate the idea of gender mainstreaming, but it would take political will, it'll take effort, and it'll take genuine commitment at every level to understand fully what it means to consider the gendered impacts of policy proposals at every stage. And we certainly aren't there yet. As we've heard already tonight, a framework that increases gender justice in climate action increases social justice more broadly. They're absolutely interlinked. Deep inequalities and growing inequalities have a detrimental impact on women. Women are more exposed to poverty, they're more exposed to marginalization. So when we think about the just transition, we need to think about gender justice, social justice, and climate justice as inherently interlinked. Mainstreaming works best when it's done from the outset. It's really difficult to add gender on when something is already formulated. The fact that the European Green Deal exists and now attempts are being made to gender it is unfortunate. It would always be healthier and more effective if gender had been integrated from the start. So I would advocate a genuine commitment and effort to gender mainstreaming alongside climate mainstreaming, which of course is essential too, but gender can't be allowed to slip down the agenda once other issues are posed as more important. So when climate is presented as a crisis, it seems to be used as a reason to ignore gender mainstreaming or to put it to one side because there are other more urgent issues. Gender equality is itself urgent, and it needs to be done hand in hand with other efforts to achieve social justice.
Thank you very much, Jill, and also for highlighting the need not only to gender mainstream climate policy, but also vice versa, and for doing so from the very beginning. And one of our speakers who has actually been very involved in that process is Kata Tutu. Because as part of her function in the Committee of the Regions, she has drafted a report that was entitled Gender Equality and Climate Change towards mainstreaming the gender perspective in the European Green Deal. So she's precisely doing that. And I'm sure that we would like all to hear what are the main demands that are formulated in that report. And perhaps could you explain how precisely you see them implemented?
Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. How are you? I try not to repeat things that has been said because most of the important things been said, so I'll try to add some new elements. What I usually say and how I try to explain is that what we are planning with the European Green Deal, it's a new growth strategy to transform everything, to transform our economies, our societies, our cities, but without knowing how will it affect men and women in our societies. We know we are talking a lot about existing inequalities. We talk more and more about the care gap, and I think that's the core of things. We talk a lot about stereotypes. We talk a lot about the pay gap, the pension gap, but we are now spending a lot of money deciding to transform everything without knowing, this spending a lot of money, will it close the gap or will it make it even wider? And what is the role of the cities? I represent the cities. The Committee of the Regions is the voice of the cities. And when it comes to actually implement the European Green Deal, when it comes to CO2 reduction, energy efficiency, when it comes to the renovation wave, or when it comes to adaptation, a big chunk of implementation is on the city side, we are rethinking our cities, we are rethinking our public spaces, we are rethinking public transport. But here is a point where we have to add a gendered lens because of our different roles, because of the care burden, which is unequally on women's shoulder. And we are not just talking about children, we are talking about elderly care. We are talking about that care should not be only the burden of women, but of the society. And we never have enough money. Cities never have enough. Nobody has ever enough money. So we always have to prioritize. What are we spending our money on? Who are we spending our money on? What are we missing from the decision making? We're missing women. Missing women realities, missing women's needs, and we don't. And this is why the care crisis is not being talked about as a crisis. We talk about energy crisis, we talk about climate crisis, and we don't talk about the care crisis. We put it away because women can bear it. And sometimes when I listen to people talking about women being climate champions, sometimes I feel that it's another burden put on women's shoulders beside the care crisis. So we are here, what we are talking about, that when we are planning to spend a lot of money and we are building new things, we have to know for who we are building these things. So when we're looking at our cities, what are we looking at? Who are using public transport? Are there equally men and women there? If not, ask the question why. Let's look at our public spaces, which are being built and maintained by our tax money, our common money. Who are occupying public spaces? Most of the public spaces are roads and parking places. And it's not equally occupied by each genders. We have to look at our parks, who are using our green spaces. We have to see who are walking in our cities. Is a city walkable enough, accessible enough? We have the 15-minute city concept, which is an absolutely feminist concept to look at. But we also have to look at different needs, not just because of gender roles, not just because of the care roles, but because of our different realities, our different perception of safety. So when we look at looking at energy efficiency and looking at streetlights and trying to spend less on streetlights, it's a different reality for us. So having good public light on the streets is a very, very differently perceived by men and women. This is why what we say is we have quite a few cities, but not too many, unfortunately, who are already doing gender mainstreaming, collecting data. Why are we going to collect data? To understand what's happening in our cities, we have to collect data to understand who is living in our cities and what their needs are. When we talk about participation, what we say is that we include those people who actually live in the city with different realities from different age groups, different genders, to talk about their realities and their needs. So this is why we say all the participation city plannings can be game changers, because we are not just missing women from the leaders of the countries, but if we go on the local level, we're also missing women. I come from Hungary, where among 10 elected politicians, you will only find one woman in every level, parliament and the local level. So having these realities on board, rethinking public spaces, rethinking public transport with a different use, different needs, and of course, combating stereotypes. So when it comes, because when we talk about green jobs, we were talking about green jobs. If we look at the roots why women are missing from science, technology, engineering, mathematics, there's no biology behind it. Women can do the same in maths and same in IT than men. It comes to the stereotypes. And when you want to fight stereotypes, cities and city surfaces, even even the statues in the city and the street names of the cities and the advertisement in the cities can help combating these stereotypes. So I'll stop here and go on with the discussion. Thank you for the opportunity.
Thank you so much, Kata, and especially it's interesting that you also clearly make this link between the need for feminist climate policy and the care crisis, which eventually goes back to a feminist understanding of what it means to care and to be able to live as well as possible in a world together, caring for each other, but also caring for the planet. And so that is very important as well. But also you put the finger on something that is quite important, and those are discriminatory social norms as well as persistent gender gaps. And that is precisely when I wanted also to look and to have our next speaker come in with Alessandra Moretti, because she has been looking more particularly at the importance of involving more women in the STEM sector, so in science, technology, engineering, and maths, highlighting the challenges that arise due to occupational segregation, precisely because we have an overrepresentation of women in certain feminized sector, which also hinder their access to quality job in the green economy. So, Alessandra, if I may ask you, could you tell us a bit more about what are the potentials of a gender-responsive just transition in closing those gaps in access to education, to information, and skills, which are key to women's resilience?
Thank you. Thank you for the question, and thank you to invite me in this important event. And thanks to Zita for her great job. Stereotypes and expectations, like Kata said before me, based on gender rather than academic performance, play a significant role in perpetuating the wall that impede individuals from freely and equally pursuing career choices. Women still have access to a narrower spectrum of employment opportunities than men do. We know it very well. The STEM and the digital sector are two perfect examples of that. In this, if this segregation is bad today, it will be worse tomorrow. The reason is simple. Climate change, the fight for new resources and technology, and the revolution of the European Green Deal are pushing towards a new world where specialized labor force in these sectors will be more and more requested. Moreover, the jobs of today and tomorrow will all require a basic understanding of new technologies. For that reason, all citizens should be able to manage them. If women will be cut off from the huge and crucial sector, the several gaps existing between women and men will increase and increase. First, women will be segregated to other less paid jobs, increasing their dependence from their husband or partner. A typical STEM worker could earn 2/3 more than those employed in other fields. And some of the highest earning STEM occupations, such as computer science and engineering, have the lowest percentages of women workers. We know it very well. The lack of economic independence is often the reason why women are trapped in violent relations. Is a bigger framework. We could affirm that the inequalities inside our societies will increase, distinguishing rich men employed in the STEM sector from less paid and less independent women. On the contrary, increased participation in paid work and challenging gender-based discrimination in employment benefits individual women, empowering them to shape their own lives, to play a role in public life, and to be economically independent. This inequality is not just a women's problem. The gender gap in STEM subjects not only penalize women in terms of professional opportunities, it also impoverishes the corporate world, research, and more generally, society as a whole. Studies carried out by the European Institute for Gender Equality demonstrates that the elimination of the male-female disparity in STEM fields would have a significant positive impact on the economic growth of the European Union in the coming decades. Moreover, women could offer a different point of view to shape the new green economy and policies in the climate area. So for all reasons, it's clear the necessity and the urgency to destroy those barriers that prevent women to succeed in the STEM sector. Europe needs investment in educational and lifelong more women to work in STEM, to choose STEM, to fully include women in the digital and green transitions, backed stereotypes and horizontal labor market segregation. The huge transition we have to shape could be a very, very strong opportunity to create an equal and just society where nobody is left behind. Let's work together for that. I believe in you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Alessandra, and for also highlighting the need for making policies not only for women, but by women, and hence the great need to have them in the sectors that are key in building our futures tomorrow. But as well, not only do we want women active in green jobs, but they are very often very engaged as activists themselves. And that would perhaps bring me to the next speaker, because she has been very much at the front rows of the grassroots movements for climate. I'm speaking of Adenike. She has been one of Africa's most vocal voices on environmental issues, and looking at the grassroots experience and based on your own experience within the climate justice movement, could you tell us a bit more about how can women and girls' capacities to take action and build resilient futures be better acknowledged, and what are the structural barriers that you still encounter as an activist taking the lead in the fight against climate change?
Thank you so much. I'm delighted to be here and to join this incredible panelists, and to the organizers, kudos. And so just as you have just introduced me, I'm an ecofeminist. And as an ecofeminist, I believe in a world whereby women and girls have a safe place for us to be able to exercise our equal rights without any form of injustice. And one of those things that my organization is working on is the fact that giving women access to resources. And we've realized through the grant we receive from UNDP, and that is why it is very important that we finance women-led organization or movements. So through that grant, which was the first we could get, we were able to give women access to organic fertilizer as a way of increasing productivity, because we have come to realize that from research, it shows that women could produce 60 to 80% of our food production, even with limited or zero access to this land. And so when we realized that, we now know that if we could give women total access to own a land, then definitely it could help to solve issues beyond climate change. It would help to tackle food insecurity, poverty, hunger, strengthen girls' education, and the rest in achieving sustainable development goals. And so that was one of our major targets, to see how we can use land in tackling the crisis, in reducing childbirth, because in Sahel, the Lake Chad, where I am from, we have over 20 million childbirth girls. They are able to, during time of drought or floods, they use them as a survival strategy. Survival strategy in the sense that the child or the brides, or what's they call the dowry that is being received as in monetary form is being used as a financial tool to stabilize the family in harsh weather condition, when there is drought, when there is flood, because most of this rural family that depends on agriculture, and now agriculture is now climatic sensitive. It's affecting all diverse people in the region. And so now, why also I advocate for the restoration of Lake Chad, because I specialize in peace, security, equality in Africa, especially the Lake Chad region. And one of our work that we are trying to do now is to work with OCHA, the United Nations Office for Humanitarian Affairs, the Nigeria office, to see how we can get towards the communities within the Lake Chad region and try to see how we can get we can resolve issue concerning resource control, livelihood issue, because I believe that as a way of strengthening women's and girls' livelihoods, there's a need for us to restore the lake as part of the steps or the solution in fixing the climate change crisis, because over time, displacement has become a very big disempowerment to women's and girls' rights. And I believe that today's girls, they are tomorrow's women. And so the way we start or the way we treat them, it depends on how we want women's rights to progress. And that is why I wrote an article on Independent UK. The title is We Cannot Solve the Climate Change Crisis Without Women and Girls. Maybe you can go read it and see more of the insights. And I included part of our work because we did a 30 days of activism spotlighting women that have been resilient in climate action despite the toxic environment that they have to carry out their activities. And we heard from different voices around the globe. And I know that there are many more women, and this is an annual event that we want to keep doing to bring more women on spotlight using my YouTube channel at the ecofeminist channel. So all of this means we are trying to see how we can rally around to bring up women voices that have been marginalized or that have been left behind, to see how we can fight for them, how we can all be our voices together to see how we can raise each other up. And one of our mission to see how we can use ecofeminism in solving the defining issues, such as giving women more access to land. Country Nigeria, we could see that sometimes traditional or religious barrier could affect women's rights, such as it could lead to women getting married at an early age than the legal age as it is. And it could also mean that once there is scarcity of natural resources, such as water, it makes women to go further away to get all of those cooking materials. And in the process, all of those time constraints affect their economic empowerment, affect their ability to contribute towards economic or environmental protection or conservation activities, or even including their indigenous knowledge in tackling the climate change crisis. So sometimes they have to trek like 20 kilometers to the next community as far back as when they can get water, or to look in search for cooking materials such as firewood, which are unsustainable, affecting their health. So gender issue is now beyond the environmental issue. It is now an energy issue, transport issue, water issue, different aspects, even agricultural issue, because if women can produce bulk of the food or the key stakeholders in our agricultural sector, then why can't we give women total access to own a land so that they could also plant trees, plant crops that could help to improve their economic status, empower them in different ways, that they could also see themselves as being independent of anyone, and in such ways it could help to reduce child marriage, because when there is just only one person working and the other one is left behind to take care of the children and the kitchen or all, then it's going to affect the financial status of the family. So these are all that we are trying to do to see how we can bring up different action to rally around for women's rights to be strengthened in different categories. And as an agricultural economist, I believe that we can close both gap at both ends. That means we have climatic factors, which we are all discussing about today, but we also have another part that we need to close, which is also very important, which are the non-climatic factors, which includes cultural, social, traditional, ethnic norms that are affecting women. When we are trying to close it from the environmental point of view, there's still another interfering factors of the non-climatic factors. That means for some culture, you are not allowed, a woman is not allowed to inherit her husband's properties, or it's not even allowed to be given a land. So it's a taboo to some extent. So all of those non-climatic factors, we have to break free from it. And these are everyday realities for some women in Africa. And if we could look at countries that are doing well in terms of gender equality, African countries are left behind because of the environmental situation. Looking at the Lake Chad region that I advocate for its restoration to strengthen livelihoods and to improve women's rights, it's very key because through that means millions of people have been displaced. Figures have it that 10.7 million people have been displaced. And according to UN figures, it stated that 80% of those displaced are female, which tells us of the fact that for every form of or the impact of the climate change crisis, women and girls bear the burden of this crisis. That means their livelihoods are lost. And since there are majority of them in the informal sectors, and looking at the COVID-19 when it struck hard, many of them lost their livelihoods and they become violated at home, leading to increase in violence against women and girls. And looking at the fact that they have to drop out of school, especially the girl child, to work as a survival strategy again. So we have to minimize, we have to reduce, we have to stop the culture of using women and girls as a survival strategy. It might not be a common reality for those in the global West or not, but it's our reality here. And how can we make that possible? Looking at how we could give grants to organizations in order to bridge this gap up, that we should act beyond just talk. For those people in power, they should look at ways at which they can fund organizations to do more, to see that we're able to scale up actions in different ways in meeting the defining issue of our time, or in solving those defining issues of our time, because we believe that there are different ideas, different innovations, indigenous ideas that women have, but they have little or no resources to harness all of these things that we have to do, to see that we're contributing to the solution and not the problem in our society. So I've gone through different grassroots activities, and I found out that women are resilient enough. They are doing much more than their society is giving to them. And so we have to encourage them. We have to provide finance, not just microfinance, but finance that would help them to scale through their ideas, their projects, and all. So without finance, I wrote it one certain time in my Twitter account, the ecofeminist account, and I mentioned the fact that without climate action, without climate finance, climate action cannot be completed. Likewise, without climate finance, loss and damage becomes inevitable, which definitely affects women's rights. And so there's no way also that we can have climate justice without gender justice. Just to tell you about a figure that I saw from UN Women that stated the fact that we have 135 years for us to close the gap. And so it is possible for us to close the gap before then, if only we can tackle this crisis called climate change, to see that it's able to reduce violence, because the root cause of climate change on gender, it's more pronounced. Looking at the fact that a figure tells us about the fact that women spend 200 million hours globally in search for water. That is a huge time that definitely affects their economic gain, contribution towards even investing their time in environmental issues. So we could see that it also affects them in terms of, we heard about the Bring Back Our Girls campaign in 2014, the adoption that happened in Borno State in Nigeria, of which led me to become an ecofeminist, because I believe that women, a girl child should have a safe environment to be able to exercise her rights, to go to school and be educated, to become a change maker, to become a technician, a doctor, an activist like me, and different change makers that she wished to become. But they were adopted because of, partly due to the security impact that is happening in the region, which I link it to be part of the reason why the shrinking effects that we are having from the Lake Chad region that is affecting adoption, kidnapping, and the rest. And so we also have to look at the fact that the hawking, young girls trying to work for the family rather than, instead of them to be in the school to learn with their child, So some people are saying girl child education as a liability and not an asset or a solution. So we all have to solve those crises or gender inequality at both ends, from the environmental point of view or the economic point of view, to also the climatic factors, to see how we can close that gap in order to make things work. So these are things that my organization is doing, that I lead climate action, and we're ready to do more if the support keeps coming in. We are ready to scale through our action and to see that we keep meeting up, because we can make this a reality, gender equality a reality, below 35 years, as mentioned, if we all have the tools that we need. Thank you.
Adenike, yeah, so I'm so sorry. I think I wish I could let you speak, but actually I'm just trying to be mindful of time, and also because we promised our audience to also interact with them, because we did receive questions from people once they registered in advance, and those of us who are interacting in the live chat. And we, in fact, received a question that perhaps you already touched a bit upon in your speech, and it's coming from Andreas Brieger, because he's more particularly addressing the question on how we can actually ensure that women do get access to climate funds, and how can we actually empower them by securing that these kind of funds are directly channeled to those that are disproportionately affected by climate change. So perhaps in a very short response, can you answer this question of Andreas? Adenike? Are you still with us?
Hello?
Yes. Did you?
Okay.
Sorry,
please.
So I was just addressing a question from the audience that was posed by Andreas Brieger. And since you briefly touched upon this, he's asking how we can make sure that climate funds are directly addressed and channeled to women.
Okay, thank you so much. So there are different organizations, different-led women organizations, or even men-led organizations that are also focused on gender issues that we can all look out for, that are doing great things. It could be new or existing organizations that are doing well, so we could channel those means of information or funds to them. So we could call for partnership. We could reach out to them. There are many. It's not only my organizations. There are also other organizations that we could give grants to. I remember I was a Nigerian youth delegate at COP25, which I focused on climate finance, and I was in the room where they said we could take some years for Africa to be able to assess them of looking at the as how the impact of the climate change crisis is affecting different countries, then using it as a priority to make them to have access to this finance. And so because Africa have these environmental issues, and I think fund or grant focused on all of these organizations working together to make this a reality should be done. So there are different organizations that we could look up to, we could reach out to support them in different means. Once the fund is available, once the finance is available, I think it's going to go a long way in helping to solve the defining issue of our time. So I don't know if I'm able to address that question.
Thank you very much. I'm going to jump on one of the strong points that you made also about migration. And that would lead me perhaps to ask Alessandra to respond to that, because indeed, as you very much highlighted, Adenike, it is increasingly acknowledged that the gender dimension is one of the most important factors in also shaping the migratory experience. And gender is one of the key tools in understanding adequate and durable responses to environment migration due to different gender needs and impacts. So why is it so important, in a few words, to consider the relationship between climate, gender, but also migration in the context of climate policy? Alessandra, if you could give us your answer on that. I think we must have lost her, but nevertheless, I'm not running out of questions because I still have many burning inside of me. So I think I will just ask Jill, because one important point also that comes out of this discussion is that women in the situation of the challenges that they face in the context of climate change are not all equal and are not part of a homogeneous group either, because they face themselves inequalities in very different ways. So how can we ensure that diversity and intersectionality are better integrated in the proposed responses to the climate policies?
This is a really important point, of course, but it's also really challenging. So it was essential that we made the connection between women and climate change, and a lot of practitioners and academics did this over the years and produced some really, really important data and knowledge and information that we could then build on to further our understanding and obviously to improve policy responses. But women are not homogenous, and gender relations and gender inequalities are cut through by other structural inequalities, whether these are class, physical ability, geographical location, ethnicity, and many other markers of inequality. So how do we ensure that attention to these structural inequalities is paid, and that where people are situated on the location of two or more intersecting inequalities is taken into account, and that they are not marginalised as a result? Three things. Firstly, we have to move away from a tendency to focus on what is easily measurable and easily quantifiable. It's very easy to count the number of women. So we count the number of women in the green economy, we count the number of women in decision-making positions. Yes, that's important, but we also need to ask, which women are we talking about? Are we really trying to bring elite women into positions of decision-making to accompany elite men? Or are we trying to diversify decision makers so that we get a fully representative decision-making body? There's a Swedish academic who works on climate change called Annika Kronsel, and she's done some really interesting work on intersectionality and climate change. And she tells us, for example, that class sometimes matters more than gender. It matters as well as gender, but sometimes we can find that class inequalities are more influential. So she gives us this example that women climate experts may have more in common with their male colleagues in the Commission in terms of their carbon footprint, in terms of their resources for adaptation, than they have in common with poor women across Europe. And we need to be mindful of these differences within the group women, so that we're not making assumptions about what it is that women need and what it is that women want, and that we're looking to see which women and also which men and which people of all genders we're talking about. And finally, we need to make sure that gender impact assessments are conducted, and that gender in the context of impact assessments is seen as intersectional. So not a single idea of a group of women, but women and all genders in all their intersectionality. Gender impact assessments are really important tools, but they're very rarely used, despite the fact that they are, in many cases, essential. I'd caution against replacing the idea of gender equality with diversity and equalities more broadly, though, because when we do this, if we shift away from talking about gender equality and gender inequalities to talking about diversity, we can sometimes lose touch of gender inequality. And gender inequality remains one of the most pervasive inequalities across the globe. So rather than replacing a focus on gender inequality with a focus on diversity, we need to accompany a focus on gender inequality with a broader understanding of diversity and intersectionality.
Thank you so much, Jill, for answering that question. And here I was going through the many remarks that were sent to us in advance to this event by the speakers, by the participants when they registered. And I just wanted to highlight, because not all of them are necessarily questioned, but there seems to be also consensus on the need to integrate women's perspective. We had, for instance, a remark by Béatrice Bellet from the Federation of Socialists in Martinique. So we had people really from beyond Europe interested in this topic, and a bit in the direction as Kata was highlighting. She's also trying to point attention to the need to pay attention, for instance, to single families that are also disproportionately women, and that are basically also very much exposed to risk of poverty. We have Yvonne, who is suggesting the idea of a UN Equality Court, the same way as we have seen ideas of a UN Climate Court, for instance. So I don't know if somebody of our speakers feels compelled by that idea. How would you imagine? Would that be something? Would that be an effective means for us to actually tackle the issue hand in hand? Delara.
Maybe just one thought on it. I hope it doesn't need to get as far, because we have the commitments in all frameworks we're discussing when it comes to climate justice, the SDGs, the Paris Agreement, everywhere the vulnerabilities based on gender are enshrined in the international commitments, and now we have to act on it. This is the problem. We have a lack of implementation in the policy making, and this is what I think we should start with. And of course, this is the ultima ratio to also talk about legal possibilities to demand that. But I think we have so many progressive actors in governments, in governmental bodies, in parliaments. We have to act on what we promise on an international level. This would be a start, I think.
Thank you very much. And I think with this, we are a bit forced to close this session, because we are running out of time. And on that note, I would just simply thank each and every one of you for your very precious contributions to this engaging exchange. And I hope this is going to be continued as part of these 2 weeks CSW debates that is happening still now, and that is going to continue in the next days. And with this, I think we are. I'm going to leave the concluding remarks in Elke Fairness' hands, because she's precisely talking to us from the CSW premises. So Elke, we look forward to your conclusion to this very exciting debate. And once again, thank you so much to all of you for your participation.
Yeah, I will switch to German because it's a little bit easier for me if I'm not so prepared, because I would see your discussion and hear your discussion, and for the closing remarks, and did not prepare something.
First of all, thank you very much to everyone who prepared this conference, especially Letizia, but of course also Katja, who sadly is sick, Lena and Amandine. You did an unbelievable job preparing, and thank you very much. Thank you very much also to everyone who participated. Dilara just said it. For a long time now, it's not a lack of knowledge, it's a lack of action. And we don't know everything, we don't have every last solution, but there is so much that we could have already done if we just started running and if we started implementing the things that we know. We can see worldwide that the crises and the imbalances are not going to go away, whether it's war, whether it's climate change, whether it's the pandemic or any other catastrophes. Everyday catastrophes, in inverted commas, if you like, they lead to more in-depth inequalities between the genders. And this is why, at this stage, we need to make the most of all this money that is being mobilized in such a short period of time for transition, for climate protection, for the consequences of the pandemic, that they now need a gender aspect built in too, before the measures are stopped and before the money's been spent. We need to make sure that we have a positive effect with these financial means on the equality between male and female. Whether the gaps will get smaller or become larger, we can see that with the recovery plans for the pandemic, the gender perspective is missing. And I'm afraid it's also going to be missing in the next steps that we will be undertaking to deal with climate change. And if that will happen if we don't now put the gender aspect into all of it. And it's not just gender budgeting. It's actually looking at whether do the measures really help to get a balance between the genders or do they not? The important thing is that we keep our eye on everything, that we keep our eye on women and their diversity, because there are differences between women too. Lone mothers, women that have a physical disability, for example, or might be of a certain age, or might be not have a job, or might be of a migrationary background, or from the LGBT plus community. So there's a lot of different additional aspects that we need to consider. But the common denominator is that they are in a worse position because of their gender. That's the common denominator, and that needs to be broken down. Kata said it quite clearly in a very practical way. What happens in the communities is so important, that we don't just build because it looks nice, but that we build so that people can actually go and live in these environments for women, children, older people, where there are short paths to go to the shops, for example, so you don't need a car. And these are things that are so important. Someone said to me, men believe in technology. Technology solves everything, and women change their approach. And it's true to a certain extent. Yes, we do have to use the technical possibilities we have, but we also need to ensure we change the way we act, so that transformation doesn't leave anyone behind, that everyone is taken on the journey, and that there are not big social discrepancies. That's particularly relevant for women's and girls' situations. I believe that we can do this. I think it's superb that this topic is now being discussed, and I hope sincerely that in the conclusions that are being discussed now, there will be new language developed, not the usual things that we hear at the climate conferences. We're not going to decide on things that the climate conference hasn't decided on, but we can set an example and make it clear that climate change and the measures are not gender neutral, that they affect women in a different way, and that, and now I can only think of the English word, but it doesn't matter, that women are differently affected by climate change than men, and that we need to act differently because of this. everything needs to be socially just, gender just, and I'm sure we can do that. And I'm so happy that there is a good paper being developed, which I hope someone will put in the chat. It might have already been in there, but if not, we can send out the link to everyone. So on that note, I hope that we can all move forward, find more gender just approaches, especially when we're trying to stop climate change and bring climate action forward. I would like to wish you all a wonderful evening or afternoon, depending on where you are. And I hope we will see each other at the very latest at the next parallel event at the next CSW, or possibly somewhere else in person, so we can give each other a hug at the end of such a meeting and have a little glass of something at the end. So all the best to everyone. Thank you.